everyone, it's meteorologist Brian Bennett. Here's your very latest update on the tropics. As you know, we have two tropical systems and a potentially unprecedented scenario where both these tropical systems could be targeting the same general vicinity on the northern Gulf of Mexico. So first of all, we have Tropical Storm Marco. Very possible this could become a Hurricane Marco as of the next advisory from the National Hurricane Center, and it is located just on the western tip of Cuba. We also have Tropical Storm Laura right here, located just west of Puerto Rico. Now, Marco is a very small storm. Small storms can intensify very quickly. They are more susceptible to weakening quickly as well, as they don't create their own environment such as the larger systems do. And that's going to be very relevant to what happens with Marco as it continues to move towards the northern Gulf Coast. All right, here's the official track from the National Hurricane Center. And the Hurricane Center does believe that Marco will become a hurricane, so very possible that it could be a hurricane as of the next advisory from the National Hurricane Center, and it would likely remain a hurricane in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico with this warm bath water, but then it is questionable whether it will actually be a hurricane when it makes landfall Monday afternoon, as it's going to move into some less favorable conditions. And here's a cone of uncertainty, which basically includes everybody from central Louisiana all the way to about Mobile, Alabama, and that's where the hurricane watch has been issued by the National Hurricane Center. So this area really needs to watch this storm closely for the potential of any fluctuations in intensity and also the track as well. All right, so that's from the Hurricane Center. Here's a look at the spaghetti plots. As you can see, that are kind of coming together. They're grouping together, gaining more confidence that the storm will be heading towards Louisiana or perhaps as far east as Mobile, Alabama. Could a landfall in the very western panhandle occur? That's a possibility, one that cannot be ruled out. But right now, the latest computer models are kind of targeting this general vicinity right around the New Orleans area. Hurricane reconnaissance aircraft is flying through Marco and Laura as we speak and gaining more information, which will be fed into the overnight models. All right, speaking of models, let's quickly look at the most trusty models here for each situation. As you know, the European is a rock star. I've looked at the different models. I have access to over 20 different models that I've looked at here and kind of come together with the model that I trust the most. When it comes to Marco, I trust the European the most. So this is looking at mean sea level pressure, and this little green dot right here, this would be the center of Marco. So as the storm moves off to the north-northwest, the European thinks that the center of circulation for Marco will be making landfall somewhere around southeastern Louisiana, very close to the New Orleans area, and then kind of fading out quickly once it loses the energy from the Gulf of Mexico. And then obviously trailing behind it would be Laura. So that is where the European thinks it's heading. As far as the intensity, right now, it's actually in a somewhat favorable environment. What we're looking at here is water vapor imagery. And again, we're in a somewhat favorable environment with a decent amount of moisture surrounding the storm and not a ton of wind shear. But we have a really mega trough off to our west. Not Megatron, but mega trough. And this trough here contains quite a bit of wind shear, especially at the upper levels. So as the storm moves off to the north, it's going to start to encounter a lot of wind shear, and that's going to prevent the storm from bumping up into a Cat 2 or Cat 3 hurricane. So in fact, it could even weaken the storm a little bit. So as it makes landfall somewhere right along the northern Gulf Coast here, then it's probably going to be a strong tropical storm or perhaps a lower end Cat 1 hurricane due to the quite a bit of wind shear. And in fact, you can see some of the wind shear kind of acting on the storm here because of all the moisture that's being shot off to the north. So look at all this moisture here. The blue, yellows, greens, that all represents moisture. So if you're in the Florida Peninsula, you know that we had moisture over us today because it was rainy for much of the day. And that rain we had is actually moisture that is being shot off the primary tropical system to our south. So again, the main point here, the storm's going to move to the north. As it does, it's going to move into a less favorable environment with wind shear, and that is going to really stunt any further development of the storm, and it could even weaken it a little bit by the time it makes landfall. Okay, so let's look at the winds, or the possible winds according to the European model. You see the storm moving north here, moving through the Gulf of Mexico, and then the European has a storm making landfall somewhere right around the southeastern part of Louisiana. And the general consensus, by looking at all these different models, is that we'll probably be looking at a strong tropical storm. The Hurricane Center does have a low-end Cat 1 hurricane as it makes landfall. So most likely not a devastating hurricane even a tropical storm from the stance of wind, because it is going to be stunted development-wise because of the wind shear. So I'm not overly concerned about the wind threat from Marco due to that wind shear. On the other hand, it could bring quite a bit of rain to coastal regions of Louisiana and Mississippi, and that could set the stage for a really soggy situation as we get Laura moving into a similar location. Speaking of Laura, here's the latest advisory. Let me just refresh this just to double check from the National Hurricane Center. Yep, latest advisory here about Laura. Again, center just west of Puerto Rico, expected to move somewhere over the Dominican and Haiti, and basically over Cuba. Exactly where it goes over the islands will make the biggest difference as to the type of impact it will have over the land. Now, if the storm happens to make more of a northerly track, then it's going to skip the very high elevations of Hispaniola, and also if it continues north along the northern tip of Cuba, same thing. It misses the highest terrain. As you know, a land interaction is not good for tropical systems, so that would actually keep a stronger storm if it were to move just north of the islands. So let me actually show you this here. Let me skip that for a second. Let me show you the elevation here of the islands and turn on my telestration tool here. Okay, telestration is on. So, now we have telestration on. So right here in the Dominican Republic, we have a very mountainous area, kind of represented by this green area. So very mountainous terrain. Also, same thing goes for parts of Haiti. Some of the mountains are up to 11,000 feet tall. Cuba also has some very high mountains as well. And when you have 11,000 foot tall mountains, that can really just rip a tropical system apart. So right now, Laura is located right about here. So if Laura happens to take a track over eastern Dominican Republic and stay right along the northern parts of Cuba, then by the time it enters the Gulf of Mexico, it's still going to be a very strong, well-defined system. It's also going to be farther north, which means as it makes that turn to the north-northeast, the ultimate track is going to be farther east along the northern Gulf of Mexico. On the other hand, if the storm moves farther south over these huge mountains, it's going to basically, it's not going to dissolve a storm. Unfortunately, I think that's kind of out the window, but it is going to prevent it from becoming an ultimately very strong hurricane, because by the time it enters the Gulf of Mexico, it's only going to be a strong tropical storm or maybe a low-end Cat 1 hurricane. So we're only talking about a difference here between the very powerful hurricane and the low-end hurricane. We're only talking a difference of maybe 50 to 100 miles or so, and to what type of situation we have in the northern Gulf of Mexico. So this will be something we'll have to watch very closely as it moves off to the northwest. The scenario that we would like to see would be one that heads over the land. That way that land interaction would help to really keep the storm from intensifying too much. Yes, it would bring very heavy rain to parts of Hispaniola and Cuba, but at least overall the impact from the storm would be less. Worst case scenario would be the storm tracks north, just north of Santiago, and just north of the northern tip of Cuba as well, and that means we're going to be dealing with a doozy of a hurricane when it enters the Gulf of Mexico to ultimately possibly have a Cat 2 or even Cat 3 hurricane as it makes landfall on the northern Gulf. Now, where will it be making landfall? Here's the latest spaghetti plots, and right now most of the spaghetti plots are kind of honing in on central Louisiana. If somebody held a gun to my head right now and said, where's this hurricane going to make landfall? I would say most likely right around the Lafayette, Louisiana area would be the most likely area, but really everybody along the Gulf Coast needs to be keeping an eye on this. Even Florida, very, very, very unlikely that either storm will curve east into the peninsula of Florida, but it never hurts to keep an eye on these things. As you know, as I mentioned earlier, they do have kind of a brain of their own and will do their own thing. But again, Florida Peninsula direct impact, pretty unlikely. Most likely the storm would be heading for the northern Gulf Coast right around Louisiana, and again, targeting kind of the central Louisiana area as of the latest updates. Here's a look at the infrared satellite imagery, and where the storm is going kind of depends on, well, where it is right now, and trying to pinpoint exactly where the center of circulation is a little challenging right now on this infrared satellite imagery. That's why the hurricane reconnaissance aircraft is flying into the storm. They're going to gain data. They're going to find out where the lowest central pressure is, and when they do, they can help feed that information into the models and determine whether it's more likely for the storm to take that northerly track away from the big mountains or take that track right over the high terrain. Okay, what I was wanting to show you here is actually the radar from Cuba, and if we can get that to load, then we'll move forward. Basically, the radar was showing that the center of circulation was located just to the west of Puerto Rico, entering the Dominican Republic. Okay, so here we are. We're having the radar load right now. Let me slide this map over a little bit. And again, I am doing this on the fly here, so appreciate you bearing with me for 1 second. Okay, so we're looking at Cuba, and here's Haiti and Dominican Republic. Okay, and here's the live radar picture from the Dominican Republic. Let's put this into motion, and let's see where we can do our best to identify the center of circulation. All right, let's look at this radar looping, and we're moving, and it looks like we have a little bit of a counterclockwise spin located just on the southeastern tip here of Dominican Republic. And let's let this continue to populate, and we'll be able to see that a little bit more. Keeping in mind that the big old mountains I was talking about, those are over here in the western Dominican, and that'll be the land interaction that would help to keep the storm weaker. So the farther south the center of circulation is, the more likely it will interact with these mountains. So we're continuing to let the data load here, and from what I've seen so far, it looks like the center of circulation is located right about here. So ultimate track, very important, something we'll continue to watch. All right, so this is actually a different model I'm going to show you here. I showed you the European model for Marco, but I actually feel like the GFS, as of the latest run, is doing the best for Laura. So I'm going to show you this solution here. The GFS model actually has the center of circulation right along the very northern tip of Cuba, and let's put this into motion over the next couple of days. And what we're looking at here is actually wind speed forecast, and you can see the eye of the hurricane right there, the eye of the hurricane. They're expecting to make landfall in central Louisiana, and the GFS model is predicting wind speeds of over 100 miles per hour. So the GFS is predicting a legit hurricane making landfall on Wednesday in central Louisiana. Obviously, we have some time for this to change, but that is based on the latest forecast information. So again, let's look at this one more time. You can see that as it is moving, let me pause it right there. As it is moving near the Florida Keys could definitely see some tropical storm, if not some low-end Cat 1 hurricane wind speeds and some very large surf. Southeastern Florida could also see some pretty large surf as well. The east coast of Florida will have some huge waves as well, keeping in mind that winds rotate counterclockwise around tropical systems. So with winds rotating counterclockwise like this here, then we would see the winds blowing against the southeast coast of Florida. That means that all that surf, all those waves, would be blowing towards east coast of Florida, and that means very large surf, rip currents, etc. Maybe even a minimal storm surge possible in any area from southern Florida down through the Keys and even to the southern part of Florida. Now the wind is going to be blowing offshore in the Tampa Bay area. That's why storm surge is not going to be a threat for the Tampa Bay area from Laura. Okay, so let me take off the telestration, switch off to the rainfall potential. This is a GFS rainfall potential, and first of all we're going to see Marco moving into the northern Gulf Coast, and what that is going to do, that's going to make the land really soggy from the 2, 3, 4, 5 inches of rain possible anywhere from the western panhandle all the way to central Louisiana. And that heavy rain is going to make the land more like jello. Jello can't support trees, so basically you weaken the land, you weaken the root systems because of the additional rain, and then you get some strong winds coming in, and boom, you're getting trees coming down left and right once Laura moves in. So this 1-2 punch from Marco and Laura is not an ideal situation for the northern Gulf Coast. In addition to that, you get saturated soil, and that means that by the time Laura moves in, you've already seen a lot of heavy rain, so the soil is saturated, and boom, you get some quick rain on top of that, and it has nowhere to go, so you get some very quick inland freshwater flooding, and that could be a major problem as well, flooding a lot of communities where the track of this system goes. Again, here's the GFS model outlook. You saw what's going to happen from Marco, where those 3 to 5 inches of rain along the northern Gulf Coast, and then here comes Laura. Laura dropping potentially on the order of about a foot or a little bit more near the center of circulation as it moves into, right now, what we expect to be Louisiana on top of some already saturated land. So really a rough scenario here, possibly with freshwater flooding, and also storm surge flooding will be a risk as well if the storm manages to strengthen to that Cat 2 or Cat 3 status. All right, let's look at the potential wave threat. And here is Marco right here. Marco is moving off to the north. Could cause a bit of a storm surge risk for areas near the center of circulation, right here along parts of Mississippi and Mobile, maybe even the western panhandle over to Louisiana. And then we start watching Laura, and notice the huge waves all along the east coast of Florida with those onshore winds. We're looking at waves on the east coast of Florida on Monday, possibly over 10 feet, between 10 to 15 foot waves, just right along the coast of the east coast of Florida, and also the Keys seeing some very large surf, possibly waves on the order of about 20 feet or so in the Florida Keys on Monday. The storm then moves in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, the pink color representing waves that could be as large as 40 feet tall in the central Gulf of Mexico. So the central Gulf could see waves that are as tall as a 4-story building. So some massive waves are possible from this hurricane as it moves off to the northwest. And then you look at this onshore flow for the Florida Panhandle, for Mobile, for Mississippi, and even Louisiana. And that's a long time period to have onshore flow from this hurricane. So storm surge flooding is definitely a possibility from the western Panhandle all the way to parts of Louisiana, and then once you get to the western part of the storm, you get the offshore winds, and storm surge wouldn't be nearly as much of a risk, but nonetheless some very rough surf as that storm system starts to move ashore. All right, let me wrap this up here with the main threats and who can expect what. And this is actually a great web page here. This is from weather.gov/SRH/tropical. So it's a combination of a National Weather Service and National Hurricane Center product, and it shows you the main threats that are expected from both of these tropical systems. The first one we're looking at here is a wind threat. So where will there be a threat of wind? Well, let's look at the Florida Peninsula here, and the yellow color here. This represents possibility of tropical storm force winds, maybe a hurricane force wind gust in the Florida Keys. And again, the yellow area means that we could see possibly maybe a tree or two come down in very southern Florida due to some of the outer rain bands that could be wrapping around this hurricane. Again, that does depend on exactly how far north or south the hurricane goes. The gray color represents practically no impact from the hurricane. That does include the Tampa Bay area. So Tampa Bay right now, not really having to worry about Laura based on the current trajectory. Although as the storm system moves towards parts of New Orleans, that's in the red here. That represents hurricane force winds that could gust over 100 miles per hour. So we could see some major damage possibly from Laura wind-wise as the storm moves on shore right near that center of circulation. Storm surge. This graphic now is looking at storm surge. In the yellow here in the southern tip of Florida, this represents a possibility of an inundation of about 1 foot. That means the water could come up about 1 foot, maybe 2 feet higher than it normally would be. It actually depends on where we are in the tidal cycle and exactly how far the water would come up, but not really too major of a storm surge risk for southern Florida and not really a surge threat at all for most of Tampa Bay. However, Louisiana, Mobile, New Orleans, and even possibly as far as the very western tip of the western panhandle is where we could see a much greater storm surge risk. In fact, we're looking at inundation of over 3 feet possible for parts of Louisiana and over towards Mobile. So storm surge flooding is a definite threat. Inland flooding is definitely a threat, and also the potential of raining on top of inundated land. So that's something we'll have to keep an eye on, especially for the Louisiana area. And the last threat here would be the tornado threat. The front right quadrant of a hurricane is where the greatest risk is for tornadoes to develop. So yes, it's possible the Florida Keys, southern Florida, could see a tornado or two and one of the outer rain bands circling around this large hurricane. Yes, the cone is farther south, but we'll have to keep an eye out on some of those rain bands kind of spiraling farther out from the main system, and there will be a major tornado threat also close to the right quadrant, which would include Mobile and parts of Mississippi as the storm system moves on shore. So again, 1-2 punch, 2 different systems. Marco looks like it's going to be mainly a rainmaker with a few gusty winds right along the coast as well, but do please keep an eye on it. Laura presents a possibility that it could provide much stronger winds, which will bring all the following: the storm surge, the strong winds, the heavier rain. It could bring all that with it and be a much greater threat than Marco will be. Alright guys, that's the latest update on what I have from you with the latest models and the latest information from the Hurricane Center. Please stay tuned and also keep an eye on the guidance from the Hurricane Center and your local officials. That is it for now. Stay tuned. I'll have more information tomorrow.